I used to think the worst kind of pain came from strangers, people who barely knew you. I was wrong. The deepest wounds come from the ones who raised you, the ones who swore they loved you, the ones who should have protected you the most. I never expected my life to unravel in a single, unforgettable moment. One second I was standing in the living room of the home I grew up in, the place filled with memories I thought were precious, and the next, I was being told I didn't belong there anymore. I remember the coldness in her voice, the tightness in my chest, the way the world seemed to shrink around me. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I simply walked out the door, because something inside me snapped, something I didn't even know existed. But what she didn't realize, what nobody realized, was that pushing me out didn't break me. It awakened something in me. A clarity. A purpose. A desire to uncover every truth that had been hidden from me, and to make sure every person responsible felt the weight of what they'd done. What happened next wasn't just a reaction. It became the kind of revenge that changes everything. And if you think being thrown out was the worst part, wait until you hear what came after. Before everything fell apart, my life looked ordinary from the outside, maybe even peaceful. I wasn't rich, and I wasn't chasing anything glamorous. I was just a young woman trying to build something steady out of the little I had. I worked part-time at a small local cafe, and spent the rest of my hours juggling online classes, hoping a degree would open doors my childhood never could. My days were predictable. Early mornings that smelled of roasted coffee beans, afternoons spent tucked away with textbooks, and quiet evenings in a house that was supposed to feel like home. Living with my mom wasn't always perfect, but for the longest time I told myself it was fine. She had raised me on her own, and I knew she carried more burdens than she ever admitted. Money was tight, stress was constant, and the smallest things could ignite her temper. I walked on eggshells without even realizing it, adjusting myself to her moods the way someone adjusts to unpredictable weather. When she was calm, the house felt warm. When she wasn't, I disappeared into my room and tried not to breathe too loudly. Still, I believed we had an understanding. I believed we could get through the hard times together. I believed loyalty and love were enough to hold us steady. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was. There were signs, small, flickering moments I brushed aside. The way she'd stare at me as if I were some sort of burden she couldn't unload. The way she'd question every decision I made, like she was searching for a reason to blame me for something I didn't even know existed. Sometimes I'd catch her whispering on the phone, her voice sharp and angry, and when I walked into the room, she'd hang up instantly. I thought it was about bills or work or distant relatives. I never imagined it had anything to do with me. But the biggest shift, the one I ignored completely, was how impossible it became to please her. No matter what I did, cleaning the house, helping with chores, staying out of her way, it never made a difference. If anything, it felt like every effort irritated her more. She'd sigh loudly when I entered a room. She'd close doors a little too hard. She'd look at me as if she was waiting for an excuse to explode. And yet I kept trying, because she was my mom, and because I believed that if I worked harder, stayed quieter, or achieved something that made her proud, the tension would disappear. I believed she'd eventually see that I wasn't the problem, that I was trying my best. But tension has a way of growing in the shadows, feeding on silence, waiting for the perfect moment to show its teeth. At the time, I didn't see that the pressure in the house was building towards something inevitable. I didn't see the storm gathering behind every clipped reply or cold glance. All I saw was the woman who had raised me, exhausted and overwhelmed, and I convinced myself that things would get better once I finished school, got a better job, and eased her burdens. I had no idea she didn't see it that way at all. Because while I was planning a future where we both finally breathed easier, she was spiraling into something darker, resentment, frustration, and maybe even regret. And I didn't realize that I had become the target of all of it. If someone had told me then that I'd soon be standing on the other side of the front door, shoved out like a mistake she wished she never made, I wouldn't have believed them. I would have laughed, shaken my head, and insisted that my mom would never go that far. But people can surprise you, especially when you think you know them best. And the day everything shattered, The day she said the words that still echo inside me, I finally learned how wrong I was. I always thought breaking points were loud moments, doors slamming, voices screaming, something dramatic enough to warn you that everything is about to change. But mine was quiet. It began with small shifts in the house, things so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. Missing items. Whispers that stopped the moment I walked in. Papers that disappeared from the drawer where I kept anything important. I brushed it off because I wanted to believe the best. I wanted to believe she was just stressed, that life was weighing on her more heavily than usual. But the truth was slowly tightening around me, pulling me closer to something I never expected. One afternoon, while sorting through my school materials, I noticed a letter from my university was missing. It wasn't anything huge, just a notice about financial aid adjustments, but I knew exactly where I had left it. Now it is gone. I searched everywhere, feeling that familiar anxiety crawl up my spine, the kind that told me something wasn't right. I tried to ignore it, tried to assume I had misplaced it. But deep down, fear whispered something else. Maybe someone didn't want me to see it. Days passed, and more things disappeared. My receipts, my job schedules, even the envelope containing the cash tips I'd been saving. Losing the money hit hardest. It wasn't much, but it was everything to me. It was my safety net. My future. Asked about it carefully, trying not to sound accusatory. The response I got wasn't angry or defensive. It was cold. Emotionless. The kind of reaction that sits heavy in your stomach long after the moment ends. I didn't realize it then, but I had stepped onto a path that would lead me straight into a storm I wasn't prepared for. Around this time, the tension in the house grew unbearable. Every moment felt like a test. I could sense her frustration simmering, waiting for something, anything, to spark it into anger. I tried to stay invisible, slipping out early for work, returning late from the cafe, burying myself in assignments. But no matter how carefully I moved, each step seemed to set something off. The silence between us sharpened until it felt like walking through broken glass. Then came the day everything changed. I returned home from work, exhausted from a long shift, only to find all my belongings pulled out of my closet and scattered across the floor. At first, I thought the house had been broken into. My clothes were tossed everywhere, drawers emptied, even my school papers thrown into a pile on the bed. For a moment, I stood frozen, unable to breathe. My heart hammered in my chest, and I felt a numbness spread through my body, the kind that only comes when you know something irreversible has happened. And then I saw it. A small stack of letters I'd never received. Financial warnings from my school, notices about overdue documents, opportunities one had missed because I never knew they existed. Every envelope was torn open. Every page creased and worn, as if someone had read them over and over before deciding whether I deserved to know any of it. Someone had been controlling my life behind my back. I sank to the floor, shaking, the final piece of denial slipping from my fingers. I had tried so hard to understand her moods, to justify the coldness, to fix something that wasn't mine to fix. But seeing those letters, seeing the proof that someone had deliberately hidden important moments from me, it broke something inside me. Yet this wasn't the worst part. The worst part was realizing the betrayal didn't stop at hidden paperwork. I soon learned she had been telling others things about me, things that weren't true, that I was irresponsible, that I refused to work, that I spent my days wasting time while she slaved away to cover for me, that I was ungrateful. The words filtered back to me through distant relatives, neighbors, and even co-workers who hesitated before speaking, as if unsure what version of me they were allowed to believe. And each whisper carved deeper into me than the last. My world wasn't just crumbling at home, it was collapsing everywhere. For a while, I cried each night in silence. I cried until it felt like I had nothing left inside me except a hollow ache. I cried because I didn't understand why someone who was supposed to love me was determined to tear me apart. But in the midst of that pain, something else was forming, slowly, quietly, like a flame catching the edge of paper. Resolve. It wasn't anger at first. It was survival. I realized that if I didn't protect myself, no one else would. And if I didn't uncover the truth behind her actions, I'd spend the rest of my life drowning in confusion and guilt. I needed answers. I needed to understand what had turned her into someone who saw me as an enemy instead of a daughter. So I started paying attention. I watched her closely. The way she hid her phone whenever I walked by, the calls she took outside, the envelopes she snatched from the mailbox before I even knew something arrived. Whenever I left for work, she'd roam through my room, searching for something she never explained. Each day, I discovered more things moved or missing. Sometimes I felt like a prisoner being monitored, every piece of my life inspected under a microscope. And it only got worse. One evening, I returned home to find her waiting for me, tension radiating from her like heat. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes held something unforgiving. The air was heavy with unspoken accusations. Without warning, she demanded answers to things I hadn't even done. It was the moment I realized she wasn't trying to understand me. She was looking for a reason. Any reason. A justification to throw me out and feel righteous about it. The world seemed to slow, as if preparing me for something irreversible. What came next was a blur of coldness, sharp words, and a feeling of being pushed further away than ever before. And then it happened. The moment she finally said the thing she had been building toward for months. The moment she pushed me out of the house and made it clear that I wasn't welcome anymore. I wish I could say I stood tall, that I felt strong. But the truth is, the moment I stepped outside, the weight of everything crashed over me like a tidal wave. I walked down the street with my bag and a heart full of disbelief, replaying everything I had missed, the signs, the warnings, the quiet unraveling of the life I thought I had. But shock doesn't last forever. And once it faded, something else took its place. Clarity. Being pushed out didn't break me. It exposed everything I needed to see. It showed me that her betrayal ran deeper than anger. It wasn't just a bad day or a harsh reaction. It was a deliberate choice. A pattern of control, manipulation, and cruelty that she had woven so tightly into my life that I hadn't recognized it until I was forced to step away. And as the truth settled in, another realization followed. If she could tear my life apart so easily, then I had nothing left to lose. That night, I stopped crying. I stopped questioning. I stopped trying to understand. I began piecing together every detail she'd hidden from me, every lie she'd spread, every opportunity she'd destroyed. And with each revelation, a plan began forming, slowly at first, then with terrifying certainty. Not to hurt her, not to lash out, but to reclaim everything she tried to take from me, to expose the truth she had buried, to rebuild every part of my life she had tried to destroy. Because she didn't just betray me. She underestimated me. And she had no idea what I was capable of when I finally stopped letting her silence me. The path ahead wasn't easy. It wasn't clean. It wasn't simple. But it was inevitable. And what came next would change everything for both of us. The night I finally confronted everything, the lies, the manipulation, the months of silent destruction, felt unreal. Not because the moment was dramatic or cinematic, but because it was so quiet at first. So calm. Almost peaceful in a way that made my skin crawl. It was the kind of calm that comes right before a storm tears a house apart. The kind of calm a person feels right before they stop being afraid. I had spent weeks collecting what I needed. Proof of the letters she hid, screenshots of the lies she told others, bank statements showing money she had taken from me. Even recordings she didn't know I had of her admitting things by accident. Every breadcrumb she'd left behind, every slip of her tongue, every document she tried to bury, I gathered all of it. But it wasn't just about evidence. It was about clarity. It was about finally understanding the person behind the door I once called home. And when I arrived that night, with everything neatly organized, ready for the world to see if I needed it to, it wasn't anger that carried me up those steps. It was for a purpose. I walked inside without hesitation. The familiar walls didn't feel familiar anymore. They felt like the remnants of a fire long burned out, ash, smoke, and memories charred beyond recognition. She was sitting in the living room, scrolling through her phone, unaware that this night would change everything. The moment she saw me, she froze, just for a second. It was the smallest crack in her facade, but I saw it. It was fear, not of me, but of what I might know. And that fear told me everything. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a lapse in judgment or a moment of weakness. She had done everything with intention, and I was done being quiet about it. I stood across from her, and for the first time in my life, I felt the imbalance between us shift. She used to tower over me emotionally, her words shaping my world, her moods controlling the air I breathed. But that night, she could barely hold my gaze. I laid the proof down on the table, papers, screenshots, recordings, every piece of the life she had twisted behind my back. I didn't speak at first. I didn't need to. Watching her eyes move over the evidence, watching her face tighten as the truth unraveled, those moments were louder than any words I could have said. There was no shouting, no chaos, no dramatic declarations. Just truth, finally stripped bare. For a moment, the silence between us was suffocating. I could see the exact second she realized what this meant. Not just that I knew everything, but that she no longer had control. The foundation she built her power on, secrecy, manipulation, confusion, was gone. Exposed. Collapsing under the weight of her own choices. I expected her to crumble, maybe even apologize. Instead, she tried to shift the blame, twisting the story in ways that would have worked on a younger version of me. The girl who used to shrink under her anger, who used to question her own memory, who used to believe she was the problem. But I wasn't that girl anymore. I watched her grasp for excuses, each one weaker than the last, each one revealing just how deeply she depended on controlling the narrative of my life. When she realized nothing was working, something snapped inside her. Her expression shifted from guilt to defensiveness, then to rage. The same rage she had used to push me out of the house before. The same rage that had terrified me for years. But this time, it didn't scare me. This time, I felt nothing but clarity. Because I finally understood what she feared most, the truth being seen by someone other than her. So, I did the one thing she never expected me to do. I showed it. Not to the world, not yet, but to the people she had poisoned against me. One by one, I sent the evidence to the relatives she'd lied to the neighbors she'd manipulated, even to the coworkers she'd called behind my back to complain about me. Every piece of truth she hid, every false story she built, I exposed it. And as the messages started coming in, shock, confusion, apology, disbelief, I saw her panic for the first time. Real panic. The kind that comes when the mask a person has worn for years finally cracks, revealing the face beneath it. She tried to grab my phone in desperation, but I stepped back. The moment was brief, but electric. A shift in power, so sharp I could feel it in my bones. For the first time, she realized she couldn't touch me, emotionally or otherwise. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. Her voice trembled, her hands shook, and the confident, commanding presence she always carried fractured like glass. It was strange watching someone I once feared so deeply become so small in front of me. But I didn't feel victorious. Not yet. I felt something else, something steadier. Relief. Because the truth wasn't just out there. The truth was mine again. I gathered my things calmly, papers, recordings, bags I'd left behind the day she threw me out. She tried to stop me, but every attempt fell apart before it reached me. All her power had always depended on silence. Without it, she had nothing left. I walked to the door, feeling the weight of years lift from my shoulders. But as I reached for the handle, she said something that made me pause, something faint, almost broken. A plea. I didn't turn around. Not because I was cold, but because I had learned something painful and liberating. Her apology came too late. Her fear came too late. Her regret came too late. I opened the door and stepped outside, feeling the night air wrap around me like a long-awaited freedom. The chaos behind me faded into the background. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. Because exposing the truth was only the beginning. What I did next would decide who I became after all of this. And that choice was the most powerful part of my revenge. When I walked away from that house for the final time, it felt like shedding a skin I had been trapped inside for years. The night air was cold, but for the first time I wasn't. There was a steady warmth pulsing inside me, not rage, not triumph, but something quieter, something clearer. Freedom, maybe, or the beginning of it. Revenge doesn't strike like lightning. It unfolds slowly, settling into your life in ways you don't expect. For me, it began with reclaiming my truth. But it didn't end there. Once the people around us saw what she had done, once the lies were stripped bare, everything shifted. Relatives who once avoided me reached out in confusion and guilt. Coworkers who believed the rumors looked at me with new understanding. Even neighbors who had quietly judged from afar now saw the cracks she had spent years hiding. It was strange, watching everyone reevaluate everything they thought they knew about me. I wasn't trying to win sympathy. I wasn't trying to turn anyone against her. But the truth has a way of rearranging relationships on its own. And slowly, the world that had once felt claustrophobic began opening itself to me. I found a temporary place to stay, small, cramped, but safe. Safe in a way my childhood home had never been. I worked extra shifts, saved every penny, rebuilt the pieces of my life she tried to scatter. It wasn't easy. There were nights I lay awake wondering if I had done the right thing, nights I questioned whether exposing her had made me any better than her. But each time doubt crept in, I remembered the girl who once believed silence was the price of peace. I remembered the version of myself who accepted pain because she thought she deserved it. And I knew I couldn't go back to that. My revenge wasn't about ruining her life. It wasn't about humiliation or destruction. It was about reclaiming something she had spent years taking from me. My voice. My dignity. My right to a future that didn't revolve around her anger. Still, the aftermath wasn't clean. After everything became public, she withdrew from everyone. Phone calls went unanswered.
Doors stayed closed.
I heard through distant whispers that she avoided neighbors, that she stopped attending gatherings, that she lived in a quiet state of denial and resentment. Some people pitied her. Others were angry at her. But for the first time, none of that involved me. I wasn't her shield anymore. I wasn't her scapegoat. I wasn't her hostage to guilt and obligation. That was its own kind of justice. As weeks turned into months, I felt myself changing. I was learning how to breathe without watching every step. How to rest without waiting for the next explosion. How to exist without shrinking. It was strange, liberating, terrifying, exhilarating all at once. Sometimes I'd walk through the city and catch myself smiling at nothing. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time, I was building a life that was wholly mine. But healing isn't linear. There were moments when memories hit hard. Moments when I wondered if exposing her had been too cruel. Moments when I felt the old ache of wanting her approval, wanting her love. But each time, I reminded myself, she wasn't losing a daughter she cherished. She was losing a version of me she thought she could control. And I wasn't responsible for the fallout of her choices. What surprised me most was how many people reached out to share their own stories. Stories of mothers who belittled them, families that weaponized love, homes that were battlegrounds instead of safe havens. I realized then that my revenge wasn't just about me. It was a reflection of something larger, something far more common than anyone likes to admit. We grow up believing home is sacred, that parents are unconditionally good, that blood guarantees loyalty. But for so many, the truth is far messier. And speaking that truth, exposing it, is an act of rebellion, of survival, of reclaiming power where we once had none. Revenge, I learned, doesn't always come from hatred. Sometimes it comes from a desperate need to be seen, to be heard, to be free. My revenge didn't destroy my life. I rebuilt it. Slowly, I established boundaries I never had before. Financial independence. Emotional space. A future built on my own decisions instead of someone else's resentment. And with every step forward, the weight she once held over me grew lighter. I didn't forgive her, not yet. maybe not ever. Forgiveness isn't something owed. It's something earned. And she never tried to earn it. But I did release her hold on me. I let go of the version of myself shaped by her anger. I let go of the belief that I had to carry the responsibility of her unhappiness. Freedom, I've learned, sometimes begins with the moment you stop apologizing for surviving. And now, standing on the other side of everything she put me through, I understand something I didn't back then. Revenge isn't about hurting someone the way they hurt you. It's about reclaiming the parts of yourself they tried to break. It's about choosing your story over their narrative. It's about saying, "You don't get to decide my worth anymore." I walked away from that house with nothing but a bag and proof of my own truth. Now I walk with peace. And peace, after everything, is the sweetest form of revenge. But here's the thing I keep asking myself, and maybe it's something you've wondered too. When someone breaks you, is revenge ever really about them? Or is it about finally choosing yourself? If my story made you feel anything, anger, relief, recognition, then maybe you've lived through something similar. Maybe you're still fighting your own quiet battles. So tell me, what do you think hurts more? The betrayal itself, or realizing how long you stayed silent?